Good
morning, colleagues. We've already formed a quorum, so I formally call the meeting to order. Members, for today's agenda, there are 6 proposals from the government. All of them have been set out in the agenda for the last meeting. Either it hasn't been completed or it hasn't been started. I just want to remind members that if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest in relation to discussion items on today's agenda, please, in accordance with 83A of the Rules of Procedures, disclose the nature of the relevant interest before you speak. I also draw your attention to Rule 80 of the Rules of Procedures in relation to the provisions concerning voting for on matters in which you have got an interest. Well, for our meeting held last time, 6 members already asked questions concerning the construction of the West Kowloon Government Office. Now, I would like to ask you if you have got any questions for this item. Dr. Helena Wong. Well, for the construction of the West Kowloon Government Offices, WKGO, in principle, we support. We have already voiced our concern to the government. The main concern being that all out of a sudden, you have got such a huge building with so many departments and so many senior public officers working there. So what about parking? Will there be adequate parking spaces? Now, there will be a total of 92 parking spaces in 2 basement floors. We have already said that our assessment is that there will be a stronger demand for parking spaces. The supply will be inadequate. We'd like to see more parking spaces available. Officials have told us that the tender has been invited, and so it is impossible to have further excavation to have 2 more floors. Now, they try to squeeze in more spaces, and we are told that at the ground level, 20 more parking spaces will be made available. Now, there is a strong parking demand. You are only merely adding 20, so it is not going to help. What worries us most is that you are going to introduce so many public officers. They have a parking demand, and if your own building cannot provide adequate parking spaces, they're going to use the parking spaces in nearby private residential buildings, including the Charming Garden and the other 4 residential developments. So there will be a problem for local parking. My proposal is that, well, let me accept for the time being that you can't have further excavation and go deeper. Is it possible to resort to double-deck parking? I think I've seen triple-deck parking. If you try to search for it on the internet and try to find out where you have got the double-deck parking or triple-deck parking, sometimes the facility is even automatic. So for the basement, I'm not sure whether the ceiling can accommodate double-deck parking. If you can, then you can double the number of spaces. If you are not going to, you're going to allocate the parking spaces according to rank of the officers, while the other officers who like to park can pay on a monthly or a daily basis. Now, if you think that the basement cannot accommodate double-deck parking, what about the 20 spaces on the ground level? I think even for open-air parking, you can have double-deck parking, and you can get one manufactured on the mainland or overseas. So has this idea ever been explored? Could I to take up this question? We are fully aware of members' concern about parking. The ASD as well as the GPA have considered the matter. As we've said, there are certain constraints. We did studied the matter, and then our conclusion was that probably we could include 20 at grade. As to your latest proposal, maybe I can defer to the ASD as well as the GPA, and then we can tell you as to how we've arrived at a figure of 20 at grade. As to your idea of having double-deck parking, we can also share with you our observations. GPA. Last time, we said that it's not our policy to provide personal parking spaces for public officers. Our policy is such that we encourage our officers to make good use of public transport to go to work and come off work. On the basis of your concern, we did go back and try to study the matter to make sure the operation of the WKGO is smoother and it will be self-contained so that we won't spill over to the neighboring parking facilities under the principle of not jeopardizing our tendering and in line with the principle of not prolonging the construction time. We have decided to make certain changes so that there will be an additional 20 at-grade parking spaces for the WKGO. We want to maximize the site, and therefore we say that during the evenings, during the week, and during the weekend, when we don't need to use the parking spaces, they will be open to public use. In this way, we can ease the concerns of members, and this can smooth the operation of WKGO, while at the same time, we are not increasing largely the number of parking spaces so as to attract a lot more vehicular flow. This will cause concern on the part of the district council as well as the nearby schools. We hope we have struck a balance. As to the more advanced parking technologies, we did consider the idea, but then there is technical difficulty. Maybe the Director of Architectural Services can supplement. DS. Well, we have got 2 stories in the basement. We are trying to reduce the depth because it is very expensive to excavate a basement. Moreover, it will also create construction waste. Therefore, generally speaking, for a basement, the design will be such that the headroom will be as low as possible. And in fact, currently, the height is such that we cannot accommodate the so-called double-deck parking. Thank you. Dr. Wang. Well, it hasn't yet been built. So why can't you sort of excavate a greater depth to accommodate one more layer of vehicles? If we talk about the construction cost, if you try that to challenge me, of course it is pointless. I'm trying to see if you will be affecting others. By having this arrangement, you won't be self-contained. You talk about the basement, but what about the 8-grade parking spaces, 20 of them? If you have double-deck parking, there will be 40, triple-deck 60. Why can't that be done? DS. For the basement. Well, for WKGO, nearby we have the express rail line. If we are to deepen the depth of the basement, we have to carry out a very detailed technical feasibility study before we can be sure of it. As to the 8-grade parking spaces, for the idea of double-deck parking, I think the technical feasibility can be studied. So are you promising double-deck or triple-deck parking at grade? GPA. For the double-deck parking frames, we need headroom, a sufficient headroom, and also we need a wider vehicular access. Just now, our proposal was to make use of the open space of the site. There will be an extra 20 parking spaces, it will already involve certain changes at grade, like certain landscaped areas will have to be adjusted so as to provide 20 more spaces. Now, if we are to set aside more space for maneuvering of the vehicles, I'm afraid there are such constraints and we can't do it. Next, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, page 2 of your paper, for government offices, for paragraph 3B, it talks about a student health service special assessment center and a government dental clinic for civil servants under the DOH around 1,400 meters square in NOFA. I want to know why it is just for the civil servants. Why can't we offer the service to the elderly as well? During the filibustering exercise, we have also said that we have got a shortage of dental care for the elderly. Of course, West Kowloon is better than East Kowloon. Why don't you think about the needs of the elderly? We have been fighting hard for such a service for the elderly. The elderly don't get the dental care. But of course, you will say that even if you can build a dental clinic, you don't have dentists, because usually you have got the hardware and you have to wait for the availability of software, just like the airport. The airport is of international standard, and yet you would build it first, yet you haven't finalized on the airspace management. In year 2007, you already decided on it, and yet you have still not come to an agreement about airspace management. Just 2 days ago, we celebrated Mother's Day. Didn't you see that many old ladies couldn't enjoy their food because they have become toothless? Mr. Leung, your question is clear. Please give Mr. Lui the time to answer the question.
Government Property Administrator. Chairman, we understand Mr. Leung's concern, but the location all along has been planned for a government office. Therefore, the facilities to be provided will center around the functions of government offices. Of course, in Yaoqing Mong District, there are places reserved for other facilities. So the concern for services for the elderly, as raised by Mr. Leung, actually has been provided for in West Kowloon, nearby West Kowloon area. In 2015-16, there will be a new home for the elderly in operation. And we've also listed that in our paper. Mr. Leung? Let me read it out again. A student health service special assessment center and a government dental clinic under the Department of Health. Students are civil society members. They're citizens, right? So why are we having a clinic not accommodating old people? Students will have assessment. How about elderly? How about the elderly? You know, these old people, they have no tooth. They're so old that they don't have any teeth. And Government Property Administrator, Mr. Yu Siu, he wants to concentrate on why the dental clinic only caters for civil servants. B. Page 2. Chairman, I think the dental clinic is to provide service for civil servants. As for clinics for other people, members of the public, there are other facilities available. And in our paper submitted to the subcommittee, we've mentioned that right now there's planning for, in Mong Kok Market, when the district is to be developed, there will be a community health center that will be open to all members of the public. Chairman, his answer is very bad. Firstly, a student health service cum special assessment center. Obviously, that is not supposed to be catered for civil servants. That means there's this group called students that it will serve. The students group may not be bigger than the group for elderly people. So in other words, you are thinking of providing health service and special assessment for students. So my question was, why did you not think about elderly? In 19 districts, there are only 13 dental clinics. There's so much available for students. As Chairman Mao said, the sun rises at 8 and there's so much available for students already. But the elderly people, they're in the last years of their life. If they have no teeth, they have no teeth. And your answer is that this is service for civil servants. Where are you trying to get it? Well, I think I'd like to ask Mr. Lloyd to respond again. Thank you, Chairman. In our funding application paper, it stated very clearly that the office is planned to be, government office. As explained in the paper, the purpose is to provide office spaces for the reprovisioning of government offices that have been renting out private office spaces. Well, I do want members to really focus on the question raised. Mr. Leung was asking, why did you, offering a special treatment for students as opposed to elderly people? Well, because we need to reach our primary goal first, to provide the space needed, and the remaining spaces we will discuss with other departments and see what needs they have, because it's only limited space made available. And we have discussed with the Department of Health, and they asked for the Student Health Service cum Special Assessment Center, and we tried to provide a space for that. For civil servants, the dental clinic for civil servants, the government as an employer, it has contractual responsibility to provide the service. So we have to provide services and in the spaces available. So as for elderly people, dental clinic for elderly people, the relevant government departments have not made a request for that. So, but in 19 districts, there are only clinics in 13 of them. So your dental coupons are useless to them for elderly. I asked him, question involving various. I asked him a question about the triangle, and then he said, well, it's nothing to do with triangle, it's another shape. But this is something to do with your policy. Well, Mr. Leung, you can veto this funding proposal. Lilian Chiang is in that district. Mr. Leung, can I ask the next one to speak? Next member, please. Chair Wai Chun. Thank you, Chairman. Of course, I will support this item because the earlier you have the government offices, the earlier the land that can be used. Of course, I appreciate our colleagues' concern about our civil servants. Of course, we need to be concerned about them, but you're spending so much money to build private car parking spaces for civil servants, then, of course, Chairman, you understand, these government offices, generally speaking, even for private offices, there's a standard for the number of car parking spaces. I think the government standard may be lower than that in the private sector, but that is something good. You set a good example. Encouraging people to use less of their private vehicles. Yesterday, we talked about the rapid rise in the number of private vehicles. There's so much public transportation, serving West Kowloon. I would object building an extra deck because it's not. We are talking about a third story in the basement, using double-deck machinery, but double-deck facilities are not often used. People, are concerned about the technicality, and also there's money involved in repair and maintenance. And you're talking about provisions in the basement. And as members said, you may have to extend the ceiling, and that requires money. If you do it at grade, of course, there's no limit to the height, but the parking spaces will be increased. You need to consider the cost effectiveness. We are to primarily serve civil servants and provide parking spaces for the senior servants. And why don't we encourage people to use more public transportation? I wouldn't support spending the extra money. Leung Kok-hong mentioned, why is the space not used for other purposes, like for serving the elderly people? That's right, but I hope that the administration, I'm sure it will, when it comes to the allocation of spaces, consider the need of the district and also the demand of the entire, territory. We need to strike a balance. That we've said this before. There are not enough dental benefits for civil servants. They're always in long queues. But this is something the civil servants are entitled to. So if there's space, and after careful consideration, if you think that that's the best use of the space in response to strong demand for the service, then we need to accept that. Well, for elderly people in the entire Yonma district, can there be services provided elsewhere? I don't think there's sufficient ground for members' request. But Chairman, my question is concerns the end of paragraph 3. Where there's the mention of a public art display area. I know it's common for art display to be put in private offices, but can the administration elaborate on this? What are you planning to do? Are you going to let some people to show their works, let young people to showcase their works? Young people cannot afford the rents elsewhere. Can you give us supplementary information? Okay, who will be entitled to display their works there? Director? Well, this is a new arrangement proposed by LCSD. Just in the new TI Tower in Kai Tak, there is the first such area already. So they'll be responsible for the future arrangement. Our understanding is that they will regularly change the display twice a year to let local artists have the chance to showcase their works. But we don't have any representatives from the LCSD today, so may I ask Mr. Lui to ask your LCSD colleagues to provide us with supplementary information in the paper? Okay, I do hope that there will be details available, because we do want to provide more spaces for young people to exhibit their works. And also, please let us know how big the area is. James Toh, next. Okay, the basic principle to let Tony Chan know. You can think along this line. Suppose that this area is to be put out to a tender for use as a commercial building. The planning department provides the criteria, standards on the number of car parking spaces. But it's not about whether we encourage use of vehicles or not. The problem now is this is a government building, and you actually exempt those standards. In other words, say there's a commercial building which are providing a much larger number of car parking spaces, because the demand is expected to be there, and it needs to provide enough spaces to be self-sufficient. Fu Wing or other nearby buildings, according to the plan in the area, according to the planning standards, they're not actually providing the spaces needed. So if you don't have enough car parking spaces, it would have an effect on nearby buildings. So I hope that the government office will not have an effect on other surrounding buildings. It's not about the benefits of civil servants. I hope the Tony Chair can understand this. I'm not encouraging civil servants to drive or fighting for benefits for civil servants, but because, like in the case of a private commercial building, you need to actually adhere to the standards for private buildings. This is not a conspiracy theory that, Tony Chair representing the property sector, and so there's collusion between the sector and the government. So you'll be, charging car parks, for $80 an hour or more. But I'm not saying that. But you have to understand that we're not fighting for any civil servants' benefits or encouraging them to drive. No, we're talking about the concrete details of the plan. The government knows that we can minimize the impact. In the past few days, we've been having so many meetings, discussing. Sometimes, looking back at it, we are talking about this now at this stage. It's really unfortunate. Now, you could. This is something that the administration needs to resolve instead of, adopting a bureaucratic attitude. Well, it's like the resolution on resolution 831 that you have to you can preset some limits, like for example without affecting the course and the schedule and so forth. But my principle is I don't want you to affect nearby residents, because you're talking about offices in 5 districts with marginal impact. Now you're getting them together. You are affecting indeed the Olympian city. So you don't want to affect the construction costs. You can say, well, I don't care what will happen to car owners in nearby buildings, and the rentals could just rise from 4,000 to 6,000. Maybe civil servants may be forced in the end not to drive to work. That's a possibility. But objectively speaking, we're saying that there will be people affected.
So you are creating a demand there, and yet you are not self-sufficient, and you are going to spill out the effect to others. Yes, for the public purse, you make savings by having 2 basement stories fewer, and then for the others, they have to pay much more for parking space. And are you saying to the citizens that they just have to count themselves unlucky? Now for the height, for the headroom, I want to know by how much do you need to increase the headroom so as to accommodate double-deck parking? I think Dr. Wong has got an excellent point. I won't argue with you about the number of additional spaces. If you say 80, I won't say, why don't you give us 100? But now you're giving us 20 only. Now, you need to be reasonable. As a commercial building, you don't have adequate parking spaces. Just because it is a government building, it is exempted from the requirements. P.S. I think this point has already been discussed many times. My understanding is that James and Helena are saying that they are worried, and please try to see if they can put their mind at ease. That is for the non-directorate staff working in the government offices there. They won't drive to work. Can you confirm on this point? Please answer the question directly. We have already spent a lot of time on this topic. Well, for the number of parking spaces that we have decided on, it is the result of detailed consultation with the district council as well as the nearby schools. In the consultation process, the district council and the schools nearby told us that they were really concerned. They thought the operation of the government offices would bring in extra vehicular flow. Now, our current proposal is that on the one hand, we want to remove the worries of members. On the other hand, we don't want to increase drastically the number of parking spaces, causing concern on the part of the district council and the schools. James would like to queue up again. I won't allow this question to be discussed endlessly because you do have a vote in your hands and you can veto the project. Albert Chen, parking spaces, you can never sort of get a clear answer because reality would be very different from what you have planned. The government may very well have some concepts, the government may have some ideals. When it comes to the actual operation, in particular, we have changes in personnel, and then a different official in charge will change the picture drastically. So as to what has been discussed, well, I think for us working at the district level, we try to tell you the possible problem. You don't listen to us, so all that we can do is to try to veto your project. And then one day we have to wait for the time bomb to be detonated. Now, for the construction cost, I hope the administration can convince me that it is professionally sound. Please go to paragraph 13. I think you have adopted a formula and then you have adjusted the price. Of course, I know the government has always been looking at the historical data, but you also have to bear in mind the latest situation. For the materials, in particular, iron, steel, copper, cement, etc., I think the prices have come down drastically, between 30% and 50%. So I'm talking about the adjustments in the material costs. And of course, there are other reasons and other factors behind the tender price. Not that I object to the adoption of such a formula. However, it is important to understand how much money will be earmarked. Now, by earmarking $4 billion today, but if you don't need that much, you should have released some of the money for other purposes. Otherwise, you are earmarking money unnecessarily. For you in your department, probably you are worried that there may be crazy overrun of the costs, so you want to prepare for that. But then there is a side effect. That is, you are too worried of cost overrun and you try to earmark money unnecessarily. And yet a few years down the road, things don't turn out as you have planned. But you have already planned for that. And then, say in 2 years' time, the tender prices come down. I want to know whether your contract will see a reduction or whether you are certainly going to increase the sum according to what you have set out here. Now, if the prices are not to be adjusted as much as you have foreseen, I'm afraid that people would follow the example of the airport authority. That is, when you have money, you have spare money, you try to spend it indiscriminately. Time and again, we have seen that senior officials have been doing things in their own way, and they have been very indiscriminate in the spending of money. So how can government departments make sure that officials won't be spending money indiscriminately just because there's money available? And we don't want to have to wait for the Director of Audit to expose the problem. Director of Architectural Services. Yes, Mr. Leung. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question from the member. Well, a project will be carried out in such a way that the funds will be dispersed over a number of years. So we have to look at the changes in the wage index and changes in the price index. The government economies has taken into account the trends, and then there will be this adjustment factor year by year. So in paragraph 13, you have got the price adjustment factor. In the year 2015-2016, in the light of the assessment of the economies, we have an adjustment of 2.75% and later on 6%. So this is our estimate. In our contract, we have a price adjustment mechanism. It means that we'll take into account the prevailing wages as well as prices, and then we'll make a further adjustment. So it will be based on the information from the Census and Statistics Department, and then we will disperse the sum that should be paid to the contractor. I don't want to take up the meeting's time. Probably the paper will get endorsed, but before it goes to the FC, please give us the projection of the government economies. We've expected the material price to come down by 30%. So I want to know if the government economies is aware of the price trends. And also please tell us how you can be sure that we won't see the repetition of the CAD's headquarters on the airport island. That is, the Director General would like to have a luxurious item and he's ignoring the other needs. Maybe Ms. Choi can answer the question. She's the PAS for FS&T, responsible for works. The FC will endorse the scope, and then the cost will be based on the scope of the works. Internally, the government has got a mechanism. Say, for example, we have a committee to endorse the floor area to be provided. We've learned from the experience of the CAD headquarters. Have you come up with a new mechanism? If you have, please give us a paper. In the aftermath of the CAD headquarters, it isn't just about the floor area, like the luxurious computer monitors. How can you be sure that they won't be spending money indiscriminately just because they spare money? Ms. Choi, all along we have this mechanism that is approval is needed. So you haven't changed. The mechanism is still valid. But in the light of that experience, the SD, the CAD, you haven't changed. How can you be sure that we won't see another case of the CAD headquarters? Well, Mr. Chen, after receiving a report from the PAC of the electrical, there's no reason for them to dismiss it, thinking that it doesn't exist. Now, Ms. Choi, before the matter goes to the FC, I think we'll have the chance to read supplementary information from you. So why don't you be more focused in your supplementary paper? Mr. Yip Kwok Him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The government has to provide office accommodation for the civil servants. Otherwise, civil servants cannot work. As to how the government is going to provide a convenient and efficient office accommodation, I think that's the crux. I am a member of the Central and Western District Council, and then we haven't got a single parking space in the Harbour Building where we have the Central and Western District Council. It's all because we have got the Ramsey Street car park, public car park next door. It is most inconvenient, and that's why I can appreciate why members are asking for more parking spaces. Now, I understand that there are 92 parking spaces, and it is said that more will be provided at grade, so over 100. I don't think it will be adequate, but at the same time, I agree that we shouldn't encourage the use of private car. It is only when people need to resort to it then they can drive. So it is right to provide an adequate number of parking spaces, but we have to strike a balance, like construction cost. Now, we've been told that further excavation will have a bearing on the construction cost, and we are accountable to the public. For the Harbour Building in Central and Western District, members did ask for the possibility of turning the space underneath the flyover into parking spaces. And then the government has always said that residents may object. Residents would rather keep the space underneath the flyover as recreational use. No, I don't think anybody can really cite a figure as to what is the optimum number of parking spaces. When there is a parking facility, of course, it is more convenient. However, we have to consider this question, that is, the number as proposed is already adequate for operational use. To me, I'm not interested in making it convenient for the public officers to park their cars. I think even for public officers, they can also take public transport. So the question is simple. Now, some members, well, setting aside whether there can be a further story in the basement, but has the ASD estimated the extra cost to be incurred in providing an extra story in the basement? The public would want to know. Now, 92, and you have also promised to give another 20. What is your assessment? Do you think that it is already adequate or it is still inadequate? What is your view?
Secretary, do you want the DAS to answer? Yes, the first question, DAS first, please. Thank you, Chairman. To create an extra story in the basement for car parking spaces, we haven't done any estimates on that yet. The construction cost would be relatively high because if you do the dredging underground, as I mentioned earlier, we need to see whether it's technically feasible. Let's not talk about the technicality. In normal circumstance, to create an extra story, how much would it cost? I think it really depends on the construction site. In West Kowloon, it's near the waterfront area, so we need to tackle the underground water issue. If we had to have an extra story, I'm sure the cost will rise. Yeah, but can you pledge that we don't want to cite a random figure, but can you, before this item goes to Finance Committee, provide us with an estimate of the extra cost? Let's not talk about the waterfront area. Like in normal circumstance, normally speaking, like based on your other experience with other projects, just in normal circumstance, how much would it cost? Extra. Well, each site is different, but to create, to increase the depth of a basement, it will be much more costly than adding a floor above ground. I don't think you have any problem answering his question, right? Can you, I can give you a very normal estimate, but for this site, we need to carry out deep study. Mr. Ip, are you satisfied? Just based on your experience, it's a simple question. Can you just give me an answer? Yes. Well, I'll provide you with some supplementary information afterwards. and also will come up with an analysis. But for this project, we do need to carry out an in-depth technical feasibility study. Okay, it's up to Mr. Ip whether you accept the answer. Mr. Yip, you have another answer, right? Okay, so Government Property Administrator. Well, our proposal, on the one hand, has balanced the need for smooth operation of the government office and to address the concerns of people in the district. We hope that can ease your concern. Well, I think I've heard this answer the third time this morning. 92 plus 21 is. Do you think your estimate that this would meet the need? Yeah, our estimate is that this should actually allow for smooth operation of the West Kowloon Government Office. What if your estimate or your assessment is wrong? Well, I think our assessment so far is based on the information provided by various government departments. This is the fifth time you've said the same thing. I was asking you. I hope that you can, I hope to run this meeting effectively and keep it in order. But my question is, if in future the West Kowloon Government Office is in operation and you find that, your original estimates are seriously wrong, resulting in the scenarios suggested by James Cho and Helena Wong, that is, the nuisance is caused to nearby car parks and car park rentals in the area go up, then what will happen? This is a hypothetical situation, of course, yes, but we will deal with it accordingly if there are problems in the future. Well, I think I shouldn't, as chairman, ask this sort of question. I was just trying to focus our attention, but it's up to officials how they want to answer the question. Next one, Lower Kwok. I think we need to consider a factor here. That is now, we have more than 10,000 staff to be working in the government office. We need to consider the needs of future visitors. The additional 20, would that be enough to accommodate the need? I'm a bit worried. Let's look at the example of this electrical complex. Many visitors don't have to drive to come here because Admiralty Station is nearby, but still there is the need. Members, consider. So if we have a lot of visitors and we will need to book car parking spaces for them, and I myself may book one myself. So there is actually the need for the spaces. Like the housing department is now in office in Mongkok. I think there are about 30 odd car parking spaces there. In the Mongkok office, the car parking cost is quite expensive there, but there aren't that many choices. Of course, you can take public transportation or, use the MTR, but sometimes you just have to drive, right, when time is limited. Because it's a commercial building in Mongkok, and they have a car park that charges on an hourly basis, So it's a Pioneer Center. So I'm really worried. You're saying that there are lots of public transportation links there, but I just Googled it on my mobile just then. You can find a lot of MTR stations nearby, but all those stations are actually the featured site is right in the center of an area surrounded by MTR stations. So, like if you are, say, walking from Wan Chai Station to government offices in Wan Chai, in the future the walking distance will be much longer than the distance in Wan Chai now. So you may not be able to walk to the office from the MTR station in future. So there will be arrangements later on, a need for arrangements later on. Well, who is going to answer? I did walk from the MTR station from Yau Ma Tei There is a pedestrian walkway leading to the site. But after the government offices is built, we'll provide very clear road signs. You can reach the office from the M-Town station in 12 minutes. Yes, walking at normal pace. From the Olympian station, it will take about 15 minutes. Have you answered the Wei Kwok's question? He's not just asking you the time. How about the support measures? So that people can go there easily, reach the site easily in rain or shine. Okay, Government Property Administrator. Apart from the links to MTR stations in the West Kowloon Government Office, there is a traffic interchange where they are reached by 7 bus routes. In Kowloon Road, in the middle of it, there are several specialized or dedicated bus routes. So I think there is quite adequate public transportation links there. Also, in the future office, there will be 9 car parking spaces for visitors. And members, we are aware of your concern that will people need to apply for, if they want to submit bids or tenders. Well, any tenders will be submitted to the Northbourne Government Office or the MOT Government Office or the Tamar site. So all the tenders would not need to be submitted to the West Kowloon Government Office. For small works application under the Buildings Department, each day there are about 10 cases, and the Buildings Department's division one of its division will be moved to another government office. Chairman, just now I heard a list of figures, and I can imagine more than 10,000 people walking for more than 10 minutes every day to work, every day. I agree that our policy now is not to enable all civil servants to drive to work, but in case of emergency, we do need to provide for them. As for the car parking spaces for visitors, 9, I heard a number of 9, right? Well, if there's so many departments there with more than 10,000 staff and there are only 9 car parking spaces for visitors, I don't think I would drive there. But no, I'm getting old. If I were to walk more than 10 minutes every day in rain or shine every day, that's quite a problem for me. Would you want next? Just then, Dr. Helena Wong proposed a solution. That is to create an extra story in the basement to provide additional car parking spaces. I think technically it should be feasible, and it can increase the number of car parking spaces and also find a solution to today's controversial topic. I don't know why the planning department and so forth cannot do that. So please, try to find a solution. And also in the past meetings, we faced the issue of government buildings not making good use of the plot ratio and space. There are no sort of rules to follow. We don't know how high a government building can be. What are the planning parameters? You just say it every time that we just plan according to the needs, operational needs of government departments. But I think this is very unfair to the society. C.Y. Leung said that because of the lack of space across Hong Kong, all the planning, there needs to be an increase of 20% in all plans across Hong Kong, if possible. How about government land? All along, there's been no planning parameters for government buildings. For average commercial buildings, they may have a plot ratio of 10 or more. Now we're using not even up to 7. So with these figures, okay, what can we say to people who are trying with much difficulties to find land in Hong Kong? I hope that based on all the standards of use of planning government buildings and the planning arrangements. I hope that all that we have said on this issue in the past meetings, I hope that you can provide us with a detailed paper spelling out the planning standards for government lands so that we can use that as reference in our future discussions on the same topic. Otherwise, every time we'll just debate, about the same issue, and we'll just be caught up in the same kind of debate later on. So I hope to see a detailed paper stating, how government lands, on what basis and standards are government lands and buildings used. I think I hope the DAS can answer the first question. Director, can we have story that is lower and another extra story that can be additional story created in the basement? There's a two-story basement now. One story will be reserved for larger vehicles with a height of 5 meters. Another story will be for smaller vehicles and with a height of 3.5 meters. So these two heights, as I said earlier on, actually are to meet the minimum basic requirements. 5 meters for large vehicles, 3.5 vehicles for smaller vehicles, private vehicles. Thank you. So second question is about the plot ratio. Can you provide us with the paper on the plot ratio? Yes, I think on this piece of land, last time the Director of Architectural Services explained. Well, Mr. Wu's question was on the issue of why government buildings do not maximize the use of plot ratio. Can you provide us with a paper? I think Mr. Chow tried to answer last time, but can you try again now? This site is planned for GIC use. When we did the planning and consider the plot ratio, besides considering departmental requests, we need to consider other planning parameters. This site has a plot ratio of 8 already. Last time they said they used 7.99. If we are to add to the plot ratio, it would affect the air ventilation, because according to our air ventilation assessment, this site is near the waterfront, and it is in the main air ventilation corridor leading to Yau Ma Tei. And Yau Chun Mong District Council is very concerned about the height of the future site. With a plot ratio of close to 8, we have made reference in terms of height to views expressed by the District Council. So in response to Mr. Wu's question, we hope to maximize the use of each plot of land. At the same time, we have to balance various factors. Chairman,
allow me to comment on the Hong Kong planning standards and guidelines. Yes, we do have standards and guidelines, but then we need to be flexible, and we have to take into account the local circumstances, development constraints, and resources available. For the parking spaces, we have to take into account whether there is a public transport interchange, availability of public transport services, etc. So I can see that the relevant government departments have already taken into account the Hong Kong planning standards and guidelines. Thank you. Mr. Wu Chi-Wai, my request is simple. Please give us a paper in writing to set out the arguments so that we can be more focused in relation to the use of government land. I hope there will be a paper. Certainly we can do so, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, for parking spaces, more is better. I was once a civil servant. I also hoped for a free parking space. I used to work at the Murray building. Of course, there was a public car park opposite the road, but you won't spend money to hire one. just like coming back to the Legico, I have to walk 15 minutes, but I take the MTR. So the more is better, and if more choices, of course, is better. But still, you have to strike a balance. For government buildings, I think government buildings have parking spaces for their own staff, quite unlike commercial buildings, which would offer hourly parking. Now, we understand that during the office hours, the utilization rate of the parking spaces isn't that high. But on the other hand, during the weekend, the car park is full and you have to queue up. Just like the case of the Elements, if you try to go there now, you can park anywhere you like. So I think there are already alternative choices. Now, Mr. Chairman, the construction of this new office accommodation will mean that floor area can be released at the 3 Wan Chai government offices. So we're also interested in the future of the 3 buildings. Now, some of the departments will be relocated to West Kowloon. For the floor area vacated, of course, we have to make good use of it. And maybe you will lease it to the public. But for how long? I think we want to know about the timetable. Mr. Chairman, once floor area can be vacated, if it is just for a year or so, and since we're talking about such a large area, maybe no one will be interested. So what is the government's plan about the floor area available in Wan Chai? So it's a matter of interface. I think Mr. Wong Kok Heng did ask this question in the past, and he's interested in the rental income to be generated. Could we take this question? Paragraph 7. Yes, the reprovisioning will be a mammoth exercise. We need to build a few buildings to accommodate all the departments from the 3 government office buildings in Wan Chai. So for the WKGO, this will be the first one to be used to reprovision the government offices. 10,000 meter squares office accommodation will be available and it will be leased. It will take a few years, so it won't be a matter of being able to lease the vacated floor space for 10 months or so. It is upon completion of the reprovisioning, then we will decide on the fate of the 3 buildings, whether they will be put on sale. In other words, it will take a long time. Maybe the buildings or the site will be auctioned or tendered. Do you have any idea about the time needed? It involves the reprovisioning of a number of government office buildings. We have to look at the resource allocation. We have to come to the Legico. So at this moment, we don't know when this will happen. But our target is that we hope that all the works will be commenced and completed in 7 to 8 years' time. Now, our objective is to make available Grade A office space in the Wan Chai area. So we want to do it over a number of phases. Mr. Chair, any follow-up? In other words, they don't have a timetable? No. So they have a seamless interface. They don't have a seamless interface. That's not the government style. Albert Chen, I'm concerned about the walking distance and also the road conditions. Yesterday at the transport panel meeting, the government told us about the problem of congestion. The TAC has come up with 12 measures. Well, yesterday I already proposed to the THB. Now, the government's policy is that for covered walkway leading from the MTR stations exits it will be for a distance of 500 meters. Anything beyond that is not the business of the government. Now, every day I walk from the pier to the electrical, 1,000 steps. It is a very good environment, but of course part of the journey is uncovered and it's quite hard when you're exposed to the elements. Now for this case, we have got thousands or even 10,000 people walking to work every day. Maybe the covered walkway won't be covered by the construction costs, but then I hope you can liaise with other departments and bureaus like the Development Bureau. I just wonder whether you can have a covered walkway leading from the nearest MTR station exit to the WKGO. I think it shouldn't be confined to this project. I think we should have something similar for all residential buildings and government buildings. A 10-minute walk is really good, and nowadays we are so conscious of our health. Now, when the weather is bad, like when you have an air temperature of 30, 33 degrees and you're exposed to the sun, it is really hot. So the planning and also the connection with the nearby transport facilities, you need to take an overall view. Will any government department answer this question? Can you sort of use this as an example for others to follow? Mr. Lui. Yes, we can refer it to the relevant departments for consideration, but at this stage we can't give any undertaking. Have we got anyone from the transport department? No. I think the THB should take this up. Now, different departments have their own policies. For the TD, I think Mr. Thomas Chow understands, like the journey from West Rail to Belvedere in Tsuen Wan. We have been told that the policy doesn't allow for a covered walkway. It is absurd. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Here you're spending millions of dollars, where we are talking about an extra sum, a small sum of money only, but it will make life so much better. What is your answer, Mr. Chow? Now, if you talk about a covered walkway, I don't think it should only serve the WKGO. There are schools nearby, and what about the policy of 500 meters? That's for a THB. We will refer it to the relevant departments. Otherwise, I'm going to move a motion when it goes to the FC. I promise to go to the relevant departments. I can move many motions. I'm grateful to Albert Chan for raising this point. For others who are interested in the parking spaces, I think members can consider this, because there's another opportunity of gatekeeping, that is the FC. Dr. Low, Mr. Chairman, I think both of us are members of the Building Committee of the Housing Authority. Whenever we build a new housing estate, then we have to consider the question of accessibility for the pedestrians. For public housing estates, of course, we will depend on or rely on the public transport. We want to see whether the residents can go to the nearby public transport. Chair, I think you would agree with me that HA members have to be satisfied about the point of accessibility. Now, for this case, we've got 10,000 civil servants. It seems that the idea hasn't been fully studied. I think this is a very grave omission. Among us, we have got female members like Miss Emily Lau and Dr. Helena Wong. What about walking from Yaomate Station to this place? Now, for you to go from Yaomate Station or from the Olympian City Station, well, from Mongkok, it is the same distance between Mongkok Station and Yaomate Station. We may very well be promoting the idea of a walking every day. But how can you be sure that there will be a covered walkway? But of course, we don't mind having to make a detour and going into nearby buildings. Now, if they haven't, they are not ready to give an answer on this point, I think they must give us a paper. There will be so many civil servants going to work every day. If they haven't taken this into consideration, I would find that it is very odd. Dr. Low, you talk about the two lady councillors. I think you refer to other members as well. I mean, probably ladies will walk more slowly. Please don't dwell on this point. Let's try to walk. I have to protest against Dr. Low for having sex discrimination. No, I don't think he means that. It's a matter of sex stereotyping. GPA. If I may provide supplementary information, other than the two railway stations named, well, at the Park Avenue public transport interchange, it is only a 3-minute walk from the WKGO. And then when we consulted the views of the district council, the TD already promised that for the WKGO, there will be a study on the transport support facilities. Well, in fact, Dr. Low's question was, if the paper goes to the FC, prior to that, is it possible for you to provide supplementary paper on this issue? I agree with Dr. Low. Your paper hasn't said anything on this. Now we have got over 10,000 public officers. There are also visitors going to different departments. How come that you haven't considered and accounted for the accessibility? So Dr. Low is merely asking for supplementary information. Certainly we can provide additional information. James Toh. I think accessibility is even more difficult to deliver than double-deck parking. Well, I asked this question because we have got a number of senior officers here. Now, 10,000 civil servants will turn up for work, and there will be visitors to the many departments. Are you really sure that the effect on the surrounding areas will be small? As many members have pointed out, well, it is not easily accessible, though it has been improved slightly. It is sort of between two MTR stations.
I'd like to ask Mr. Chow, German Secretary. He said according to the planning standards, if this were a commercial building with 10,000 staff, well, Secretary clarified that there will be only 3,000 civil servants. But how many people will be going to work there? More than 3,000? I think the 10,000 means the combination of 3 government buildings. But for those going to West Kowloon office, there will be 3,000 odd. Okay. 1,700 of them will be actually indeed. Well, let's look at the 3,000 as the base figure. Mr. Chow, like if we were a commercial building, what sort of car parking spaces would he require to comply with the standard, generally speaking? Well, of course, we have different definitions for flexibility, but what would be the arrangement, normally speaking? Mr. Chow, the planning standard will not be based on number. Imagine that it were an office building for each 15,000 square meters per 150 and 200 square meters of floor area will be given a car parking space. And the next 15,000 floor area per 200 to 300 square meters will be given a car parking space. But I think James said you may have left earlier. I mentioned before that in using, well, I was here, I listened to that. Yes, I heard that. But so based on the criteria, floor area criteria, what will be the number of car parking spaces needed? Who will answer that? So based on the planning standard mentioned, so how many spaces there should be then for car parking? We were referring to commercial buildings. For government buildings, there'll be a lot less people going in and out. James told. So I was asking you, what would be the number of spaces needed? I think I was referring to commercial buildings, but commercial buildings, well, people have the impression that more people going in and out of a commercial building. But based on your criteria of, based on floor area, well, do you want to work out a figure and then we can try to see whether that makes sense? So you can say that, well, 130 car parking spaces, and now you're planning for 90. So that means we need to create an additional 40. Well, Mr. Chow was saying that commercial buildings are different from government offices. Do you want him to come up with two sets of figures? Well, he doesn't have any figures because the planning department doesn't say what the estimate will be for government buildings. So let's just look at the evidence and just tell me what figures that you would come to. Mr. Lowe Kwok here, he can work it out for you. Every day, I can try to count the number of people submitting plans. You can generate the demand. Not everyone drive to the building to submit a plan, for example, to the building. Does everyone use DHL to deliver parcels? In Pioneer Center is much closer to MTR station. So we can just look at the evidence and judge, how many spaces there will be needed. Members and officials, including our meeting last week, we have spent 100 minutes on this topic. Now the focus, I think we haven't reached any consensus on this topic of car parking spaces. Leung Kwok Hong, your question has not been forgotten. But if we just are in this standstill forever, then we're talking about demands from various parties. This side said there's nothing they can do, and this side says that there needs to be more car parking spaces. I think members, we can't stay here forever. We need to decide how to deal with this. I don't think you need a chairman to remind you. There are many ways we can proceed. I think. Can I ask the officials to answer? Are you going to give us the same rigid answer again in response to the many questions raised by members? That could be one answer, and the members can decide what to do next. Permanent Secretary, I heard your views, and I knew there is a heated debate here. But just then, the DAS has told us about the constraints. If we were to add to the car parking spaces, there would be difficulties. But having heard members' views, we will carry out a further study. Members have asked for supplementary information as well. We will further explore the issue, and let me stress that there are a lot of difficulties involved. We hope that in our paper to be submitted to you, we will add to it. Having considered all the objective constraints and other factors, we'll brief you on in the paper whether we can provide for additional car parking spaces. Okay, those in the queue now. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Chairman, I asked them why is it that there can be a student assessment center and dental clinic for civil servants and yet nothing for the elderly? We all know that there's a shortage of dental clinics for elderly people. In the wake of my filibustering, the government has added to the services, dental services for elderly people. But you know that, in the private clinics, dental clinics costs are very high. Otherwise, there'll be no need for dental clinic for civil servants. Civil servants will use the clinic. Same for car parking spaces. And yet you haven't addressed that issue. And you said that, well, it's none of your business. Just then I bumped into Professor Sophia Chen. She's not a doctor. Yeah, she's a professor. But, what can we do with your attitude? I wanted to ask you, why did it cost $41 million, on furniture and equipment? What sort of furniture and equipment are you using? You haven't answered me on that. To be true to your conscience, you're telling me that it's a difficult job ahead. Let me repeat to you a proverb. It's difficult for a man to become a woman, but Parliament can do nothing is impossible with the Parliament. Well, if this was the UK, then you would have been sent home instead. But this Parliament is useless here. In the UK, well, Parliament makes all the decisions. It controls the government. It's not like in the system here now that we have, a half presidential system. My other question is, you said there's no room for change, but let me give you an example. Carrie Lam, the Chief Secretary, and Mr. Paul Chan, Secretary Chan, shortly after C.Y. Lam became Chief Executive, announced to all the Hong Kong people that they will optimize industrial buildings to provide more humane, 10,000 humane subdivided flats. But that proposal was vetoed by the civil service because of all the concern about light pollution and so forth. You knew that if you didn't put a halt to that, there will be disastrous results. Let's not talk about the car parking spaces. I don't drive, but let's talk about the dental clinic. There's so much public grievance now. Civil servants have dental clinics, and Leung Kok Hong was asking why. What about the elderly people? Can they share the clinic? And you said no. A secretary and the chief secretary proposing, 10,000 more humane subdivided flats. They announced it at a press conference, and after that, the whole plan was dropped. So change was made. But here in this body that is similar to a parliament, we can't make any changes. Will you go back and talk to Mr. Kowloon Man, or go to someone higher up, talk to Carrie Lam, ask her to create a dental clinic for elderly people in West Kowloon? That they can definitely bring about a dental clinic for elderly people in West Kowloon. Okay, we'll vote on the basis of your answers. P.S. I will ask the government property administrator to answer the question on furniture and equipment. Of course, we want to maximize the use of space. As I said, we have almost used up the entire plot ratio at the site. So we need to put at the site all the offices needed, and there's limited space left. And we have considered proposals submitted by various government departments, and we found that it is most appropriate to have the student health service and a dental clinic there in the office site. And the relevant government departments have not asked us to create a clinic for elderly people there, but we'll look into the proposal. Okay, government property administrator. As for furniture and equipment, our usual criterion is to use durable and plain furniture. Any furniture that can be reused, we'll move them from the old office in Wan Chai to the new office. But for some CCTV equipment or telephone system, they cannot be relocated in the new office. So therefore, we need to have new furniture because now the space will involve 7 government departments, so that's quite a number of equipment that will be needed, new equipment needed. But I understand members' concern for services for old people. But it doesn't mean that all services, such services, have to be in the West Kowloon government office. Under the current planning, the government in Yau Chi Mong district, there are such services provided, as I explained, for elderly people. I can't press the button. Well, you've used up your time. Do you want to queue up again? Okay, I'll speak in the next round. Next one, Dr. Helena Wong. Chairman, I think we've said a lot on what we need to discuss today, but the administration needs time to look into issues like double deck or, about having stories of different heights in the basement. And also on the issue of accessibility, there's room for improvement. May I suggest, according to our rules and procedures, that can we adjourn the discussion on this item until we have got the replies from the administration on the technical issues and so forth? And we can move into the less controversial items instead. So according to the rules of procedure 33 of the committee, Helena Wong asked for an adjournment of the debate on this item. According to the section 33, procedure 33, members can speak on the proposal made by Helena Wong. Because of limited time, I suggest that each member can speak for not more than 3 minutes. Members who want to speak, please press the button or indicate by raising your hand.
Helena Wong, 3 minutes. Mr. Chairman, we have already said a lot. We are not thinking in terms of the welfare of the civil servants, and we are not saying that we have to provide free parking spaces for the civil servants. But then we have got 3,000 people turning up for work, and there are 92 parking spaces, and only less than 10 visitor parking spaces. This is most unreasonable. I think the government would like to leave it till the next term government. So it is not right for you to leave the problem to others. It will certainly impact upon the neighboring residents. We have foreseen a problem. We hope the government will resolve the problem. We have proposed a solution, that is double-deck parking. And then accessibility has also been raised by other members. Just now, some public offices haven't ruled out the technical feasibility. You have asked for more time to sort out whether there can be adjustments in the height of the 2 basement floors. I think if you can provide double-deck parking in one of the floors, then 50 more, and then another 20 more in the open air parking lot. And then for visitors and civil servants, I think they should pay for the parking spaces. Therefore, I suggest that we adjourn the discussion of this item so that the government can come back with a feasibility study, and then we can have it again next time. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, I don't think anything is impossible. Now you have got a high block and a low block. You have got 17 stories and 15 stories. What about increasing it by 1 story? maybe it just doesn't look so nice, and then the lighting and the ventilation will be affected a little bit. In this world, if you have the will, there is a way. Like on Mother's Day, if you want to take your mother to dine out, if you can't get a table at the first restaurant, you can go to another one. Do you know how many people were not able to enjoy food because they've lost all their teeth? No, I don't think you should put up a fight. You can go back to discuss the matter. Of course, I know you haven't considered the matter thoroughly. I know that the Yau Ching Mong District Council didn't object. Was that the case? Now somebody has come forward and have told you that it is not going to work. You say that I'm trying to stir up trouble. Even if I'm really stirring trouble, you still have to give me an answer. Not to mention that I'm not creating trouble for you today. Don't try to blame it on filibustering and think that you can dodge the issue. You need to listen to your voice of conscience. You try to dismiss my question by saying that I'm still filibustering, like the pro-establishment camp. When somebody speaks up, you say it is filibustering, and you think that it is legitimate for the government to refuse to answer. Now, we have learned a lesson. That is, at the time of design, you should ask the right questions. And what about the philosophies of governance? Now, I have got an electoral platform from C.Y. Leung, and it's a personal copy that he has autographed for me. He has got this in his electoral platform. But then the political enemy that he hates most is now taking him to task. I have a good reputation. Do you know it? Now, tomorrow you'll go out to say that this is filibustering. But you yourselves are filibustering. You should have asked for the item to be suspended. It is absurd for you, it is foolish of you not to have asked for this. Emily Lau, I haven't asked any questions, but I think that this is not, I thought it wasn't that controversial, and I thought it should be given approval soon. Now I've been listening to the discussion. Members across the spectrum have asked many questions. Now, what we are getting from the officers is that when the problem emerges, then a solution will be found. So you just think that you'll try to get approval and that's it. Now, for parking. Now, whenever we receive the district council members, they have been telling us that this is a problem. We don't want to have too many vehicles blocking the roads, but sometimes somewhere we do need parking spaces. Why are you so stubborn? Now, of course, there are other things that are very controversial, but for this one, it isn't. How come that you are escalating it? Now, Permanent Secretary, I think you need to resolve this problem. Otherwise, Hong Kong will not be fortunate, and then our competitiveness will drop. Now, others are not respecting us, and the mainlanders are not trying to learn from us. And we've been told that our officers that go out to the world do not command any respect. So I hope you will think about it. This is not the way to conduct a meeting. As the chair has said, we've spent more than 100 minutes. It's not supposed to be very controversial. If we allow this to continue, then we have to hold endless meetings all the time. Dr. Low, well, if we are to vote on this paper, then this paper will go to the FC quite some time later because there is a long queue of papers. So there will be sufficient time for the government to answer the questions that we have asked. If the answers are not satisfactory, we can still indicate our position when we have the FC meeting. So I don't see any justification to adjourn the discussion. Now, I understand that before the summer recess, the WSC has got a lot to go through. Chair, I know you also want to deal with as many papers as possible. Therefore, I don't agree that we should adjourn the discussion. This is because for the WKGO, there is an urgency. By constructing the WKGO, we can vacate the floor area of other government office accommodation. So it will have a lock-on effect. Therefore, we need to commence the project ASAP, and I will urge the government to answer our questions seriously. Even if we don't adjourn the paper, even if we vote on the matter today, there will be time between now and going to the FC. Mr. Chen Kam-lam, I think members have been very clear in their requests. Of course, there is an advantage in increasing the number of parking spaces. However, when the government drew up the plan, certainly there were some systems and mechanisms to follow. Unless members are saying that it doesn't matter, try to put in as many parking spaces as possible, any spare ones can be leased. This is tantamount to a policy change. If you ask for a policy change, ask for a policy change and ask the government to agree to it. Otherwise, we are upsetting the mechanisms and systems. There will still be many government buildings to be constructed. Does it mean that we can exceed the planning standards? Now, we have been criticizing the government for being luxurious and being extravagant. Now you're asking the government to deviate from the standards. Is it realistic? Now the government departments have agreed to go back to consider providing 20 more parking spaces. Why can't you be realistic and accept it? Why would you insist on getting what you have been asking for? What about other services? For other services, of course, we need elderly services, for eye care, for dental care, etc. But does it mean that we must have it here? Are there other alternative sites? Are you trying to take this opportunity, put in the request and try to stall the project and try to delay it so that eventually it won't get through? I cannot understand. This is a government office building. We know how many government departments will be accommodated. The plot ratio will almost be exhausted. What else would you want to do? I've been listening all the time. I've remained silent. Of course, some of these suggestions are good, and government departments should go back to consider the suggestions. If they can be accommodated, do so. If not, justify why you can't. So I don't think we need to resort to this measure, that is adjourning the item and ask them to come back next time. I think this is an abuse of the procedures of our meetings, and it is not justified. You can veto the matter so that they will go back to think, or you allow it to go through and ask them to account for the issues again at the FC meeting. At the FC meeting, you can still vote for or against it. It's time to put the matter to the vote. I don't think we should dwell on the procedural side of the matter. Government officials have already told us about their position and they are willing to consider some of our suggestions. Let them go back to consider them. James To, as to whether the discussion should be adjourned, this is how I approach the matter. As the chair has said, of course, last time not many members talked about parking spaces, but I and Lena talked about it, and we have had many meetings. There was already sufficient time for the government to think clear about it. But then the government's position is that no. So the government will always do this, insist on this. Now for the A-grade parking, 20 only, and then for double-deck parking, it has been rejected. Now, if some members are saying that I am die-hard filibustering, then this is not I would have done. As I have told you right from the beginning at the last meeting, I said that I supported the proposal, but I just want you to minimize the impact. I dare not say that there won't be any impact at all. Now, if you say that we can veto the paper right now, today, well, sometimes a member may say that the first veto is a technical veto, hoping that there will be more information at the FC meeting. Well, in fact, I have wanted to vote for the matter, but at the same time, I want to seek a solution. Well, when I first talked about the parking spaces, Chair, you will recall that I said that it's a minor issue, but I hope that there will be an early solution. That's the approach. That's my perspective. So I tried to support the paper. That's my starting point. Leung Kok Hong said that he would insist to have elderly dental care. I may not agree with him. What we demand is a solution. If you force me, now if the adjournment motion is not carried, then I've no way out. I have to vote against it. Now, assuming that this has been blocked, what is the difference between blocking it and adjourning it? By adjourning it, the government will go back to rethink. Now, we have been told that tender has been called. I don't know if other members are aware of it. We've been asked to help. Now, Helena and I have tried to think of a solution. The double-deck parking should not have come from us. It should have come from you. You should have considered alternatives. I don't know what you want to do. Now, there are members who haven't taken part in this at all. We are in support of you, and still you want to agitate us so much. If no other members would like to speak, then Mr. Yang, would you like to tell us whether the tender's validity period is about to expire? Thank you. Just now, the GPA and the ASD have given answers. As agreed, we are going to provide 20 more parking spaces. Mr. Lui has also said that they would go back to see if there would be room for further addition of parking spaces and will provide supplementary information before the matter goes before the FC. I just want to say that Mr. James Cho talked about the tendering. Well, paragraph 33 says that tenders have been invited and the tender validity will expire on the 25th of June. So, if you adjourn the discussion, or if the paper will only be discussed later at the PWSC meeting, it is possible that we are not able to get the funding before expiry of the tender validity. In other words, there is a possibility that we have to re-invite tenders. And I'll put the matter to you. Sorry, Helena Wong, you have 1 minute to give a reply. Dr. Helena Wong. Nothing much to add. I just want to adjourn the discussion so that the government can come back with clearer answers. That is, other than the 20 additional spaces, is the government able to come back with more parking spaces, and whether double-deck parking is feasible?
I think that should accommodate your tender exercise. Well, it's up to the government to decide. If the government give us the slate, then it's not our responsibility, for the today. Okay, I'll put the matter to the vote. Our subcommittee decides to adjourn the item. Let me finish. Adjourn the item PWSC 2015-16-12. As Chen Kim-po asked for.
要求記名表決，表決中。
He wants to claim a division. Okay, so you have 5 minutes for the vote.
OK， 即係如果否決咗。又唔係機動得咁緊要，係即係呢個。
So members, it's time for voting. So please press the button. Before I announce the results of the vote, members, please verify your vote. Okay, time's up. Please indicate the results of the vote count. Of the 29 present, 11 in favor, 17 against. So those in favor is less than the number of those who oppose. So therefore, the proposal was rejected. So let's continue. Leung Kwok-hong. Well, so we're now continuing our discussion on it. The focus has been on the 20 car parking spaces. Please continue, Mr. Leung. Chairman? The light is not on. Okay, the light is on now. Okay, give me about 20 seconds. So now we're continuing our discussion. I want to respond to Chen Ken-nam. Chen said, why? Well, how about the Finance Committee? Well, Chen Yu-yan was better, and Nguyen Singh thought he was a financial expert. We're talking about financial affairs now. Nguyen Singh made it clear that issues that are dealt with at the subcommittee stage should not be discussed at the Finance Committee. So please pay attention to what the person you supported has said. Was he right or wrong? The pro-establishment camp is the leader of the camp. He has the right background. Please focus on Mr. Leung on the paper. Because someone tried to smear me, so I had to respond. Leung saying, okay, please continue and exercise self-control. The 20 parking spaces, of course, that's important. Well, it's a small, minor matter and can be resolved. But I was referring to a policy issue. Finding land is difficult. We all know that. We need land for housing and that. Now, within a government building, there is already a student special assessment center. I mentioned it many times. But your answer was about something else. You said that the government land cannot accommodate all purposes. Yes, that's correct. But you thought about students. Why can't you think about elderly people? You said the plot ratio has been maximized. But that isn't true. You have the greenery works. Well, for the sake, well, the air cooler system also occupies space. So, you can say that I'm hypocritical, or deliberately try to block the funding allocation. You still have to answer the questions. In fact, so there is this, issue here. Chairman, this is a chamber for discussion, and yet, some members are just cold-blooded. Let me say this again. Within government buildings, you have the land there, but what is in your mind? Let me point out, so DAB doesn't have any logical thinking. In Tai Po, there are a lot of DAB members who own restaurants and shops, and they ask for more parking spaces for them. And on the ground that, Tai Po residents are in an unfortunate situation that they don't have enough parking spaces when they go out shopping and eating. And they put the pressure on the government, and that's what the largest party has done. They did whatever is advantageous to them, asking for more car parking spaces. If it's not advantageous to them, then they would not ask for the car parking spaces. What sort of parliament or chamber do we have here? Who are we working for? Are we working for the rich, civil servants, poor people, or are we working for the elderly people? Members, this item, we have spent more than 165 minutes on this item. Now I plan to extend this meeting by 15 minutes unless most members object to it. I don't agree with that. I don't. Let's not dwell on it. Let's try. Those who object to extending the meeting by 15 minutes, please raise your hands. 6 against. So that means most of those present opposed it. In other words, well, Dr. Kwok is in the queue. You have 3 minutes. Do you want to speak? Okay, we'll finish it after you've spoken. Chairman, I've looked at the paper. I do want to approve the funding request, but having heard from other members, I can't accept this paper. And they said, why don't you just press the button and let's discuss it in the Finance Committee? Okay, if you want to be a long-term rubber stamp, please go ahead. But you have to respect LegCo, and you have to respect your identity. And if you don't respect your identity as LegCo member, I can't accept that. I do hope that the administration can think about it. I do want to see the request approved. But if there are actually there are potential solutions and yet we ignore them, then that would be a pity. Just then we talk about feasible solutions like providing car parking spaces in a mechanical way or creating more additional spaces for car parking purpose. Then I think we can look into that. I hope that we can wait to get concrete suggestions first. Honestly, Mr. Leung Kok-hong, his suggestion may not be feasible within the building, but services for the elderly, health services for the elderly that we've been waiting for a long time. Can the administration tell us in this area or in the government's plan? Are there areas designated for such services so that we can be better assured of the provision of such services, at least in the upcoming government plans for GIC sites? And we also like to know, okay, with the new services, how can the waiting time be shortened? I hope that you can address the questions raised. Then we will pass the request. But if you remain single-minded and not accommodate our request, then I can't give a yes vote. Chairman, lately I went to Taiwan and Japan. I found that there are buildings which use multi-story car parking spaces. The land is even more precious in Tokyo. They have even at grade car parks up to 3 stories high. So I think we can come up with solutions. In South Korea, there's a very small site in downtown area, 8-story high, 4 car parking spaces in an 8-story building, and you can press by pressing the keyboard or on the computer, you can reach the car park in the upper story. So the government can think about it more in depth. If you don't give them enough time, the contractor who won the tender can have little room for maneuvering. Maybe the government thinks that you will have enough votes, but that's not enough. Nowadays, so many people are watching what happens within the chamber. If you just force it upon us, then you will just trigger more public grievance.
Citizens have no confidence in the governance of the administration. If you try to force it through thinking that you have got sufficient votes, I don't think you are resolving the problem. Well, in fact, you are delaying it, and we have to spend more time at the FC meeting. You have nothing to gain. Why don't you try to find an early and constructive solution? Sorry, time is up. Next meeting, to be on next Wednesday, 8:30.